In the shadowed corners of America, there are legends and government secrets that intertwine beneath open skies and rugged terrain. And in rural Wisconsin, along the lonely stretches of Bray Road, a witness recounts a midnight encounter with a creature so monstrous it defies logic. A beast whose very presence left scars on both flesh and soul. And in a later encounter, a mystic glow gave way to a far more chilling chapter. A covert interrogation by shadowy government agents with tactics too unsettling to fully recount. Step into the abyss and welcome to Weird Encounters, a place where the ordinary fades into shadow and the unexplainable comes alive. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and join our ever-growing community of the curious. Your support is the lifeblood that keeps this channel alive. Now, prepare yourself, for what you're about to witness is not for the faint of heart. They call it the Pine Barrens, an endless sprawl of twisted pines and sandy trails, haunted by centuries of hushed whispers. It's a place where local folklore can feel like more than just stories, where the very air seems weighed down by secrets. Sometimes, late at night, you might hear a distant cry echoing through the trees and wonder if there's something out there that defies explanation or reason. This all happened in the Pine Barrens of southern New Jersey. I was staying at a friend's cabin near Batstow Village in Wharton State Forest, the same region infamous for its ghost towns, weird local tales, and, of course, stories of the Jersey Devil. I've heard the usual lore, everything from the Leeds family curse to strange cult circles out in the middle of nowhere. I always chalked it up to wild folklore, but the night I arrived, something felt off. The cabin itself wasn't too far from the Molokai River, tucked beneath a canopy of pine and oak. It was humid, the kind of night where the air clings to your skin. Around 9 p.m., we were wrapping up dinner when we noticed an awful stench wafting in through the screen door, like rotting meat, heavy and metallic. My friend said maybe a deer died nearby, but I've smelled carrion before, and this was worse. Almost chemically pungent, like decay mixed with burnt rubber. Before bed, I stepped out to the porch, half hoping the fresh air might clear that foul smell. That's when I noticed something in the dirt, just at the edge of the trees. It looked like a dead rabbit, but I can't even call it a rabbit anymore. It was so mutilated. Its hind legs were missing, torn off in a way that didn't look like a coyote or fox kill, too jagged, almost like the limbs were ripped rather than bitten. The body looked scorched around the edges, as if something hot had seared it. Needless to say, I left it where it lay. I didn't sleep much, replaying that gruesome image in my head. Early the next morning, I went back out to bury the thing or at least move it, but it was gone. No tracks. No sign of disturbance, just a dark stain in the dirt and a few bits of fur. I decided to drive into Hamilton for supplies, and at a small market, I overheard two older locals chatting about strange kills, turning up along the bogs near Atchin Lake. One claimed he found a deer carcass half embedded in the mud, its ribcage splintered open. The other just shook his head and mumbled something about staying away from the back trails after sunset. I quietly asked if they knew what might be responsible, and they shrugged, saying maybe some sick predator or that old devil story come to life. Later that day, my friend introduced me to an elderly caretaker who manages a cluster of abandoned cranberry bogs deeper in the forest. We visited him because he sometimes sells fresh berries on the side. When I asked if he'd heard anything unusual, he said he'd been hearing screeching noises late at night, like the cry of a wounded animal, but more guttural. He also claimed to have seen lights moving between the pines after midnight, as if someone was carrying lanterns. He used the phrase, "the Watchers," but didn't elaborate, just got quiet, and gazed off into the distance. That night, I convinced my friend to drive out with me to one of the old bogs. The road was more sand than gravel, lined with tall, scraggly pines that pressed in from both sides. After a few miles, we cut the headlights and just listened. It was eerily quiet. No crickets, no owls, nothing but our own breathing. Then faintly, this low groan drifted through the trees. It intensified, morphing into a ragged scream that shot chills up my spine. My friend whispered that we should leave. Right then, something thumped loudly on the roof of the car, like a heavy branch had fallen from above. We both jumped. I scrambled to flick the headlights back on, and in that split second, I saw a shape leap off the roof into the darkness. It moved too fast to identify, but it seemed large, bigger than a dog, but hunched with what looked like elongated limbs. My friend slammed on the gas, and we tore out of there, my heart pounding. The next morning, we found fresh scratches along the car's roof, 4 parallel lines, shallow but precise, like claws had raked it. My friend tried to rationalize it as a branch, but the grooves were too straight, too deliberate. We decided to head into Batstow Village to see if we could talk to a park ranger or someone with local knowledge. The ranger was polite but unhelpful, insisting that no large predators inhabit the area other than occasional coyotes. When we mentioned the deer carcasses and the horrific condition they'd been in, the ranger just nodded and said people sometimes exaggerate. A little later, we met a woman at the visitor center. She was flipping through postcards, wearing a t-shirt with the old Leeds family motif, the folks rumored to be connected to the Jersey Devil origin. She said she'd grown up in Chatsworth and had plenty of nights hearing unearthly shrieks from the pine stands. She once saw a deer run out of the woods, missing patches of fur, as if it had been burned or corroded by something. She said the creature seemed delirious, eyes bulging with fear, and it collapsed shortly after. Locals found it the next day, riddled with deep wounds and scorch marks, as if acid had been poured on its flesh. She believed a dark entity or some experimental creature roams the barrens, not the classic winged devil, but something equally sinister. I started poking around the deeper corners of local lore. There are whispered rumors of clandestine labs in the barrens. Some say government-affiliated, others say private groups, testing on wildlife. Another story I heard was that these robed cults hold rituals to summon the original spirit of the Pine Barrens. One man I spoke with, while fueling up near Chemung, claimed he once stumbled on a clearing scattered with half-burned bones, arranged in strange patterns. He said a black SUV pulled up soon after, and 2 men told him to leave if he valued his safety. He's convinced there's a cover-up afoot, though he can't prove any of it. On my final evening, I was alone at the cabin. My friend had left for a family emergency. I was trying to relax with a book, but around midnight, the power cut out. Total darkness enveloped the place. My phone's flashlight revealed shadows dancing on the walls as the wind rattled the windows. Then I heard slow, heavy footsteps on the porch. My heart raced. I'd locked the door, but that did little to calm my nerves. The footsteps paused near the window, and I swear I saw a silhouette with broad shoulders, an elongated head, and something glinting, like eyes reflecting the faint moonlight. I didn't move or breathe. I just waited, paralyzed by the idea of what might be outside. After what felt like an eternity, the steps retreated, fading into the night. I spent the rest of the night curled up in a chair, clutching a kitchen knife, flinching at every rustle or creak. I left the Pine Barrens at dawn, nerves on edge the entire drive back. I couldn't stop replaying the images, the mutilated rabbit, the scorch marks, that unholy scream, and the figure on the porch. This went beyond the typical Jersey Devil sightings I'd heard about. It felt more violent, more malevolent, like something unnatural is prowling those woods. Maybe it's an undiscovered predator, Maybe it's some twisted government experiment, or maybe it's something else entirely, a shadow of the old legends that's grown darker over time. I keep hearing fragments of the same horrifying puzzle. Burnt carcasses, bizarre lights, scorched footprints, black SUVs, robed gatherings. Something is stirring in those pine stands, and I'm not convinced it's just one phenomenon. If anyone out there has witnessed similar events, or if you've heard rumors from your own time in the Pine Barrens, I'd love to know. Even if it's just to confirm I'm not alone in experiencing whatever hunts those woods after nightfall. In that vast labyrinth of scrub pines and lonely roads, a traveler found more than just eerie folklore. The Pine Barrens have always held their secrets close, but when the night air turns foul and the screams echo under a moonlit sky, we're forced to wonder, is the legend worse than the reality, or is the reality far more terrifying? They call it the Beast of Bray Road, a stretch of rural highway in southeastern Wisconsin rumored to host something that roams under the moonlight. Some say it's nothing but a legend, a tall tale born around farmland firesides. But every legend has its believers, and then there are those who've come face to face with something they can't quite explain. This happened in July 2022, not far from Elkhorn, Wisconsin, on the infamous Bray Road. I wasn't there on any cryptid hunting expedition, just visiting a friend who owns a small horse farm. I'm the sort of person who scoffs at horror movies, so you can imagine my surprise when the unbelievable started lurking right in front of me. Let me backtrack. I'd vaguely heard of the Beast of Bray Road from some news article, probably references to Linda Godfrey's reports years ago, but I never paid it much mind. The day started normally enough. I arrived around noon, helped my friend with feeding the horses, and we sat on her porch exchanging small-town gossip over lemonade. By late afternoon, she ran out to do errands in Lake Geneva, leaving me alone to enjoy the peace of the countryside. I took a short walk down Bray Road at sunset, just to stretch my legs and enjoy the glow of the fields. As I passed a cluster of tall corn, I noticed something just off the road. Looked like roadkill, maybe a raccoon or small deer. Not unusual out here. The odd part was how it appeared to have been shredded, not just hit by a car. Fur, flesh, and bone strewn around in a way that felt more violent than a typical accident. A wave of nausea hit me, and a sense that I should probably turn back. But the sky was so pretty and the evening so quiet, I convinced myself it was just a coyote or maybe a stray dog that had done the damage. I wandered a bit further before heading back. A neighbor's dog started barking frantically from behind its fence, the kind of bark that's more alarm than greeting. I tried peering through the twilight to see what it riled up, but there was nothing on the road except me and a few streetlights flickering on. I shrugged it off and made it back to my friend's property without incident. That night, I decided to sleep with the window open. Summer breeze, crickets, the usual countryside lullaby. Sometime around 2 a.m., I jerked awake to a sound I can only describe as a low, guttural growl. It was so deep I felt it in my chest more than I heard it. I thought maybe the horses were spooked, so I jumped up, grabbed a flashlight, and slipped on my boots to check. Outside, everything was silent, as if the entire night froze the second I opened the door. I walked toward the horse paddock, scanning the beam of my flashlight across the grass. The horses were restless, huddled in a corner of the fence, eyes wide. I muttered a few reassuring words, but they stayed pinned to that spot, noses flaring. Then, near the edge of the field, behind an old storage shed, I saw a large silhouette, hunched, with a thick torso and what looked like pointed ears on top of its head. It was too dark to see detail, but the shape was unmistakably bigger than a normal dog. More upright, too, as if it was crouching on two legs. My flashlight caught a brief glint of eyeshine, an amber reflection that flicked toward me. Every hair on my neck stood up. I heard a snarl, low, rumbling, the same growl that woke me. The figure dropped to all fours, or maybe it had already been on all fours, but it moved in such a fluid, unsettling way. Before I could blink, it bolted, disappearing around the side of the shed. My heart pounded so loudly I worried I'd spook the horses even more. I tried following with the flashlight, but there was just darkness and the faint rustle of cornfields. I hurried back inside, locked the doors, and stayed up the rest of the night, jumping at every little noise. The next morning, my friend came back and took one look at me, asked if I'd seen something outside. I told her about the shape, the growl, the eyes. She tensed, said people around here whisper about a werewolf-like creature, a big dog man. I must have looked incredulous because she insisted that a few neighbors had stories of sightings. She said it might just be a large wolf, but wolves aren't common in this area, and she's never seen one near her farm before. That day, we checked around the shed for tracks. The ground was hard, though we did see some shallow impressions, bigger than my palm, but not clearly defined. We also found claw marks on a wooden plank leaning against the side, 4 parallel lines, each about an inch apart, scratched into the grain. She'd never noticed them before. We ended up visiting a small diner in Elkhorn, where a couple of locals overheard us asking about strange animals. One older woman said something about seeing a wolf walking on its hind legs near Bray Road in the 1990s. Another man rolled his eyes, but admitted that late at night, some folks claimed to see a shaggy figure dart across the road and vanish into the cornfields. I asked if maybe it was just a bear, but they insisted black bears are extremely rare in that region, and none are known to walk like that. That evening, around dusk, we decided we weren't going to let fear keep us locked inside. We sat on lawn chairs watching the tree line, trying to pretend we were just stargazing. About half an hour in, we heard snapping twigs off to the right, near a row of overgrown bushes. We shone a flashlight, and for a split second, I thought I saw something tall and broad slip behind a tree. But the next moment, it was gone, and the only movement was a bat fluttering overhead. We packed it in soon after. I left the farm the next morning. As I drove back down Bray Road, I noticed a fresh scrape in the asphalt, like something heavy had dragged claws across it. Could be from a piece of farm equipment, I told myself, but it looked too random, like long claw marks. My phone had no signal most of the drive, so I couldn't even snap a decent photo or check maps. I felt watched until I finally hit the main highway. Since then, I've gone down a rabbit hole of research about dogman sightings. There are more accounts than I ever realized, scattered across the Midwest, but Bray Road is a hub of these stories. Some talk about government hush-hush, as though there's knowledge of a rogue predator out there, but no official confirmation. Others say it's something supernatural, a shapeshifter or cryptid that's been around for generations. I don't know what it is. I just know I'm not the kind to jump at shadows, and that night, I definitely jumped. It's one thing to read about a legend in a newspaper clip, but another to stand there in the dark, hearing horses panic, and realize you're looking at something that shouldn't exist. So, under the moonlit fields of rural Wisconsin, one visitor's quiet weekend unraveled into a brush with something that defied both logic and local explanation. A reminder, perhaps, that when folklore steps off the page and into the shadows of our world, it can leave us forever changed. Out in the ageless expanse of Sedona's red rocks, where legends and government secrets intertwine beneath a burning sky, one traveler's brush with the unknown soon turned into an encounter far more unnerving than any folklore could predict. When shifting lights, spectral figures, and eerie vibrations give way to shadowy interrogations by officials whose methods chill the bone, the line between myth and a government cover-up becomes frighteningly blurred. I experienced something last August in Sedona, Arizona, that has left me questioning the nature of our reality, and, more disturbingly, the secrets the government seems determined to keep hidden. I had set out from Phoenix with high hopes of experiencing the mystical charm of Sedona's red rock formations. I parked on a quiet pull-off along State Route 179 near Bell Rock, where the sky was ablaze with the colors of dusk and the desert air crackled with an inexplicable energy. It wasn't long before I noticed the unusual, a series of erratic, pulsating lights that defied explanation. They shimmered in hues of blue, green, and crimson, merging seamlessly with the fiery sky. I was compelled to document the display, setting up my camera on a tripod and recording the surreal dance of light. As I stood there, transfixed, a figure emerged from the labyrinth of red rock shadows. It was a tall, gaunt silhouette with angular features and eyes that flashed an unnatural, icy blue. In that split second when our eyes met, I felt as though I'd been peering directly into a well of ancient sorrow and a warning. I raised my camera to capture the moment, but the image dissolved into a haze of static, as if the being was deliberately erasing its presence. The desert around me seemed to shudder. The lights pulsed faster, and a deep, almost imperceptible hum resonated from the earth itself. Before I could process further, the atmosphere shifted. The surreal spectacle was abruptly interrupted by the sound of a vehicle engine approaching in the distance. I barely had time to register my alarm when two unmarked black SUVs pulled up near my truck. I watched in disbelief as two men in dark suits emerged from one of the vehicles. Their faces were stern, their eyes cold and unyielding. I didn't recognize them as local law enforcement. There was something distinctly off about their demeanor, something that hinted at secrets far beyond routine patrols. They approached with measured, almost predatory steps. I recall one of them speaking in a low, clipped tone that carried an unspoken threat. They didn't ask directly about the lights or the figure I'd seen. Instead, they peppered me with questions about my camera, my notes, and my reasons for being at that remote overlook. Their tactics were invasive, pressuring, with a subtle implication that I had witnessed something that was not meant to be shared. Their words were laced with warnings, hints that if I spoke of what I'd seen, I'd be treading on dangerous ground. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. Their questions were delivered in such a way that I knew it wasn't just standard procedure. These were government officials, and they were clearly protecting something. They made vague references to national security and sensitive information without ever elaborating. At one point, one of them rested a hand on his holstered sidearm, and I realized with mounting terror that I was being interrogated using tactics that I have no desire to recount in full here. Every fiber of my being screamed to remain silent, and though I tried to answer as little as possible, their probing left me shaken and fearful. They took my camera and downloaded a few seconds of footage from my recording, muttering about data integrity and anomalous activity. I was warned, quietly, with a look that conveyed more than words, that I was not to speak of what I'd witnessed. They even suggested, with an unmistakable undercurrent of menace, that my continued inquiries might unsettle things further. Once they finished, they escorted me back to my truck, where they left as silently as they had arrived, leaving behind a lingering sense of dread and a voice in my head urging me to forget the night's horrors. I drove back to my motel in a daze, every shadow outside my window twisting into sinister shapes. That night, as I lay in bed with the door bolted and the lights on, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not just by the spectral figure among the red rocks, but by an unseen force that had now infiltrated even the mundane corridors of government power. The next day, I attempted to piece together any record of their visit, but all official channels remained stone silent. I've since been warned by anonymous sources, friends of friends who work in obscure government circles, that certain events are better left unspoken. The fear of repercussions keeps most of them silent, and I must admit I am terrified to share even this account. Since that fateful night, I've encountered numerous unsettling details that have only deepened the mystery. In hushed conversations with local UFO enthusiasts and retired military personnel, I've heard whispers of government cover-ups involving supernatural phenomena. Some claim that interdimensional entities and cryptid creatures are monitored under strict secrecy. Others insist that the Sedona region is one of several hot zones, where the veil between worlds is dangerously thin, and where those who glimpse the truth are silenced. I continue to live with the constant terror of reprisal, of government officials coming for me if I dare speak too openly about what I witnessed. Every time I close my eyes, I see those piercing blue eyes of that gaunt figure, and I hear that insidious hum mingled with the heavy footsteps of those dark-suited men. I'm writing this with trembling hands, partly as a catharsis, partly in the hope that someone else has encountered these inexplicable events. I've been told time and time again to keep this story to myself, to bury it deep within, and let the desert's secrets remain undisturbed. But I can't. Not when the truth continues to haunt me, and the inexplicable evidence lurks just beyond the horizon. I only hope that someday the light of transparency might dispel the shadows that now rule over Sedona's sacred red rocks. Beneath Sedona's ancient scarlet cliffs, one traveler's brush with a shifting spectral reality and the cold indifference of government interrogators reminds us that some mysteries are shrouded in layers of secrecy and fear, as the desert night swallows both light and truth. We're left to wonder what cost our curiosity might demand. My dear watchers, your presence is a gift. Thank you for your time, your curiosity, your courage. But remember, there are others who wander, unaware of the dangers that await. By liking this video and subscribing, you offer them a light in the darkness. Support our channel and keep the stories coming, simply by giving a thumbs up and subscribing and sharing.